Today I wanted to talk about my relationship with vampires. Basically, I wanted to auto-analyze myself in relationship with the mediatic figure of vampires in order to find a correlation between the blood-sucking demons and a neurodivergent, anxiety-ridden basic bitch. That's me. Before I begin, I do want to say that they're doing stuff outside, working. I don't know what they're doing exactly, but they're making a lot of noise, so if you hear anything, it's probably that. Back to my essay. As with any essay, we begin with the basics. What is vampire? And I actually was going to get really in-depth into it. I rewatched some documentaries that I really like in regards to the subject, and I found a podcast really interesting when they got really deep into all of the powers that are related with vampires and where do they come from. Really cool. I'm going to put the link down below. However, as much as I love me some history and cultural background, the reality is my relationship with vampires, became before I knew about them. In fact, a big reason why now I love so much vampires is also because of that realization, that they have turned into an archetype on its own. We recognize them before we even recognize them, basically. When I was younger, I would watch the Count Dracula from Sesame Street, and I just get it, I understood. Probably in part because I was a kid, so I wasn't actually asking that many questions, but also because there's a huge chance that throughout the years, watching other media that talk about vampires or something related to them, it just made sense altogether. So vampires, basically you know them before you know them. And that on its own I think is fascinating. But vampires, as with many other things, come from the need that we as humans have of telling stories. We need to have others, we need to relate to others, and we do that by telling stories. But also stories often not tell us something about our fears or doubts or our dreams even. And as we go by, groups change, they modify, they adapt, they might connect with other groups, so also the stories change and adapt and go on. But I do think that it's interesting that some things sometimes just remain to us. There's something about them that just scratch a thing in our brain that makes us keep on telling that story. There was a trick they used to do in the olden days when they thought someone might have been a vampire. They would put on the grave sand or stones. The idea was that whenever the vampire would rise up, it would have to count every grain of salt of every pebble or stone. And so that would buy time, because while it was counting, probably the sun will rise again and they have to go back to the slumber. Now, where does the idea that they needed to count comes from? I don't know, but as you probably guess where I'm going with this, it has remained, but it has shifted. That's what's human creativity, which is something that I love. We take something that maybe even have a not so great connotation or story behind it, but we can turn it into something useful, something nice, something pretty. Vampires are an amalgamation of folklore that throughout the years has also developed and blurred with other things from so many places. And it keeps on creating its own thing, which keeps on changing. Just in correlation with my own development, these creatures have changed a lot. In many ways, they have shifted into whatever people need to talk about, need to communicate and tell stories about. Besides the Count Dracula, I would say my first love was an anime called Vampire Knight. The anime is 2 seasons, and I would say it's a very good, entrance into the whole lore of that story. And if you like it, then you could go to the source material, which is the manga. In the manga, of course, the story develops further, and I'm not gonna lie, I debated how much do I want to talk about the media that I'm gonna talk about, and let's not deny, there's a lot to say about just this book right here, but I decided, let's just keep it clear on what we're talking about. But once again, I could just do one video talking about this. There's a lot. Anyway, now the anime was important for me because at the time, I was a huge fan of anime, and in general I was consuming a lot of media, especially fantasy related, because I wanted to escape reality. And there were 3 main animes that they were my personality. I loved them. But I knew about other anime that talk about vampires, but this one just hit different. Why? I'm not certain, but mainly I wanted to be the protagonist. I even, yes, I'm saying this, I asked people to call me Yuki, which is the name of the protagonist. Yes, I was kind of a weeaboo. Now, let's be honest, Yuki is a Marisu. She is pretty, everybody loves her, and everything goes well. All of her decisions are justified, it's all good because it's her. There is this thing that the story has a tendency to either make you just love her or pity her in a very weird dynamic there, but I mean, it is, of the time. And after all, I still wanted to be her because how could you not? An emo preteen teenager whose life was upside down. Of course I wanted to be this girl. Plus the tame Lolita fashion and hot characters, come on. Now this is where I need to point out two important things. First of all, media has a lot of power. Ever since we're little kids, and we know it because of the stories that we have been telling, well, it can impact us really much. Media can teach us things, and we can just, as kids developing, get ideas into our head. The lack of communication and condivision in regards to the things that we consume might lead often not to maintaining things that are not that positive. Also, as a neurodivergent, I took a lot of social cues from the things that I would watch. So of course, all of this made it so that, well, I took things that were not very nice, but at the time, as a young girl, again, not having anyone to talk about this, I took it as cute, as romantic even. It would later come to bite me in the ass. And I would behave, that's why I would ask people to call me Yuki, because I genuinely thought maybe if I act like her, well, maybe my life could become like hers, who knows? And yes, I am now laughing about it, of course, but I also need to kind of get serious and point out that we need to be gentle with ourselves. If you're a kid, you're a kid. There's nothing wrong with that. And especially with your own self. Come on now, we were kids, we were all trying to go by. I think it's important to be more gentle with ourselves, especially our younger selves. Plus, this is where the aspect of media literacy and having someone to talk about really comes at play, because maybe you don't have anyone to talk about. So that's why the things we see, that we consume, need to have a healthy base. No, not everything has to be a lesson, but having a lot of things around you that maintain very toxic ideas and romanticize them, it's harmful, that's it. Now, not only this did this to me, but I actually think that the Twilight Saga did the same. Now, this one came before the Twilight Saga for me, so I didn't got into that train. This was my Twilight Saga. But I have seen some videos about people that were really into it when it came out and have read the books and all of that. And they talk about it years later, rewatching the movies and talking about all of those toxic traits. And I'm sorry, they are basically the same ones that this thing had. But I actually have not read the book, and I think I just saw the first two movies. So if you have read both or seen both, please let me know your thoughts. It would be fascinating to know about them. So yes, both the book and the manga had a lot of traits of the time. Not great ones, but absolutely an indication of the ideas of the time. My next phase, here basically I wanted to be an adult, and I focused my attention on characters that were fully independent adults. And my main muses were Van Helsing and the Underworld trilogy. Starting with Van Helsing, that movie is almost camp. I'm saying almost because it has its moments, but there's something very straight-coded to it. But I mean, a fun rewatch. It is what it is. Underworld, however, gave me modern vibes because I like my phone, I like having electricity, so I'm actually more into the idea of vampires in the modern era, to be honest. Plus, it gave me a main character, female, that kicked ass, but also the powers and, the things that she was able to do made more sense, weren't just like, oh, it's the protagonist, so of course she does. Both of them very dramatic, very interesting in the fashion department, as well as the idea of someone who was an outcast. It might be a group that they should belong to, but they don't, and they kind of have to make their own thing, become this idea of independent adults, but at the same time, deep down they had friends and they have people that care for them, which also for me was kind of what I wanted. Plus, if I had a penny for every time Kate Beckinsale had made me fall in love with her in a vampire-related movie, I would have 2 pennies, which isn't much, but it is where it had happened twice. Not always praise though, not always praise. There are still a lot of, Hollywood mentality and ideology because of the time period. For example, the fact that any creature is Hollywood hot. So body dysmorphia was in the air. As well as other ideas in regards, for example, of queerness or just, other minority groups. even though we're talking about already outcasts. So yeah. For me, during this period again, because I wanted to be an adult, in many ways, I kind of was dealing with the idea that I was always going to be alone for the rest of my life and no happy ending exists. So the characters that I focus on kind of had been through so much, and they had, again, no real happy endings, because I was trying to emulate them and kind of be ready for whatever life would throw me, any drama, any traumatic thing. But at the same time, again, wanting deep inside that there was someone that cared for me. Yes, my therapist had a field day with just this. After all this, I actually had a time away from vampires. Because I hated them or anything, I still like them. But there wasn't any media thing, any series or character or whatever that, lived in my mind rent-free. And during this time, there was a lot of things going on. Work, studies, relations. There's a lot going on, but I was absolutely working on trying to understand myself a little bit better. I was learning a lot of things about me and wanted to do so. And then someone recommended to me a show based on a video game, Castlevania. I saw the first episode with the person that recommended it, and then I went home and rewatched the whole thing because it was really good. Then I waited for the other storyline to go on, and I loved that. Highly recommend that show, to be honest. Out of the bat, you should watch it. It's great because you have the first storyline, the one that introduces the characters, that has its own ending. So if you're good with that one, that's great. You have your closing. But if you're really into it, then you have the other story that you can go further with. And both are really interesting, really great. Castlevania had the characteristics of Vampire Knight, like the fact that it's a cartoon, the type of characters, the fashion also, some of the fun cutesy stuff, but it also recalled Van Helsing and Underworld in the themes. They were a bit more adult and dark fantasy. So the best of the worlds, but done better. It really balances quite well the darkness with the comedic timing, which doesn't feel forced or out of place. It's just great to kind of let the whole thing go through a little bit easier. It does take the myth that we all know and love, but I feel that it makes it their own in order to tell their own story, which I think is great. The characters have a lot of depth to them, and it's not just the protagonist of the love triangle. All of them, they feel like there is a story behind, and they genuinely feel that, they are there all the times, not only just to further up the plot. But most importantly, for my inner child, was that these characters were not perfect. And they were not just black on white. There was something else in there. Not everything they did was okay. They would even just say silly stuff. But the show itself wouldn't just justify it and be like, oh, it is how it is. No, they would be called out. They would be made fun of. And also, I don't know why, but the social cues, the interactions, just made more sense to me. I wanted to be Yuki, Celine, or Van Helsing, because the main idea was that they have the cool powers, which makes them cool, which makes people like them, which makes them happy. It all makes sense. Of course, it's not realistic at all. So then you have Alucard, who is, amazing, so cool, with the powers, with the looks, who it's also sometimes a bit of a loser, and he sometimes doesn't know what to do, and he just wants to have friends. I love that at this point we are seeing that in a very funny twist of events, vampires are more human. But after all, vampires are human. But there was one more character that I needed to find before getting into full realization. It was Guillermo. What We Do in the Shadows, it's a series that takes the piss out of not just vampires but many other creatures, as well as the world we're living and the rules that makes up. Also, it's not afraid to be sensitive, and it can really touch your heartstrings. But again, it maintains this taking the piss. Nothing is that serious. Guillermo de la Cruz is some of the best representation, actually, I have had, because he's a queer, pathetic, Latin American, maybe neurodivergent, anxiety-ridden, obsessed with the idea that becoming a vampire might solve all of his issues magically. That's me. That's me. Hi, that's me. I think a huge combination of the factors that I love the show, it's the comedic aspect and how they make fun of Guillermo, but they also make fun of the vampires, and they make fun of the serious people. Anyone who is serious kind of gets made fun of. But it makes fun of because things just happen to everyone. You cannot control stuff. Things just happen. And by making light of the seriousness of life, well, it kind of is cathartic for me. Because again, when you're younger and you're taking out of your, child life, because you need to confront adulthood reality, you kind of turn everything into serious mode because that's what happened to you. You did not have the time to kind of understand the balance. Everything just turns. And having a show that, again, makes fun of it, with a character that also represents you a little bit more than many others before, well, it's lovely to see, to be honest. The show also have many other characters, all of which are very interesting, very fun, and you might see them when they get presented and you think, oh, they might go one way, but then they go other way, and they goes back and forth, and it's just so dynamic and so fun. But also, even though it's a horror comedy, there is still growth. It is not just like, okay, we have the same thing over and over again. Things do happen and do modify the characteristics of some people, and they change their minds. And again, it's turning vampires and also other creatures into more human-like. If anything, I would almost imply that in many ways we are trying to turn vampires back to human form. Now, I don't think that ever is going to actually happen, but just an idea. Now, staying on the theme of seriousness that I was talking before, I think it's time that we talk about the OG Dracula. I tried. I really tried. For this video, I genuinely tried to read this book, but yeah, no, I couldn't. Too thick, too much for me, I'm sorry. Don't get me wrong, I give credit to Bram Dude. Absolutely, I'm never denying that. However, I do feel it is important to remember that this book was written and read during late Victorian, early Edwardian period. This is important because this is a period in which the mindset was basically Europe is the best, mainly the West, of course, mainly England, and they had this tendency to kind of take from other places. They had this fascination with the exotic. So they would take and just turn into entertainment for themselves, forgetting everything else, which is not that great. And sometimes when you read the book, you can feel it. Again, the way they talk about something that is not England related. Yeah, it was a bit too much for me. Once again, I'm not denying the importance of it. One thing, in fact, that I will give it, the fashion. So, mainly in the movie. Because, I don't know if you notice, I'm really into Victorian fashion and style, and I cannot deny the influence that it also had. Also, you see it in the movie. Beautiful, amazing, gorgeous, wow. And the fact that it has maintained itself, so for some reason when you think about vampires, you automatically think about Victorian era. Come on, that's just amazing. But let's leave, again, Stoker aside, considering it wasn't it for me. Back to Castlevania, What We Do in the Shadows, one of the things that I think I like so much about it is also that they are laughing a little bit about the creatures. The creatures that we were presented and we have been told for so long that are these so elegant and dramatic creatures that are so wow, but they show us that they constantly just are not. They just make mistakes. They're just basically humans with some very special powers, but after that, they're losers just like anybody else. And I really like that, as well as the playfulness when it comes to talking about what is life as an immortal being, and the good and bad side of being turned into a vampire. I also really like the introduction of more modern ideas, like the emotional vampires that might drain people with boredom or with pity. I think not only that it's fascinating, but also, I know some people that are like that, but more on the negative thing. It's like they feed upon negative stuff. It's wild. Now, there's a theme that goes into basically all of the media that I have talked about until this point, and that is the found family trope. Now, in the original folklore, the idea of vampires is that they would rise up, from the grave, and the first place they would go was to their families. Of course, in fear, the families would, try to do everything in their power to get rid of the dead. So we have there a sort of rejection from the family. Plus, there is, especially in terms of linguistics, a correlation between vampire and witch, and we know how they treat them those. So you see this idea again of rejection, of a person that is an outcast. Now, the reasons behind being an outcast, they modify, they change. And for me, I think the relationship, again, with the family and the rejection from the family is interesting because of things like blood is thicker than water. Lovely saying, very interesting, but also if blood is toxic, it's just toxic. And that is a trait that a lot of people can relate to, which is, okay, my family, the people that I'm related to by blood, they are nothing else than that. People that I'm related to by blood. And sometimes the healthy thing to do is to find another family. Find another family in the sense that as humans, once again, we want to have people around us. Even the most introverted person, we thrive from socialization at the end of the day. We cannot survive on our own. We cannot. Then we can develop into the fact that vampires can create other vampires. But I think it's interesting that whenever there is this direct lineage, it often doesn't come out well. Something always happens, that a direct lineage doesn't work. So they end up with having to find other vampires like them. And I love found family tropes, so for me that is just amazing. I also want to point out the idea that at first, just the thought of being bitten by a vampire and the fear of turning into a vampire was huge. And now we have figures like the familiar, people that want to turn into vampires, that actually work for them in order to hopefully one day be turning into vampires. Which I also think it kind of shapes a little bit that dynamic. Don't get me wrong, even that there's a weird power dynamic, but I also feel that when we talk about familiars, then there is the introduction of ideas like vampires are not immortal. I mean, yes, they can live for a long time, but they can be killed. So, and anyone can kill them. Again, a sort of humanification, I guess, of vampires. Other aspects of consent remain, like for example, needing to ask in order to enter a place. And I really like the fact that we are far from the, damsel in distress and almighty powerful Dracula. And of course, the erotic aspect kind of remains. But to be honest, as a queer person, I have never thought about any other way, to be honest. So for me, it's like, yeah, of course, everything goes. But again, that might be just me. I'm just happy to see it more normalized. And here is where both Castlevania and What We Do in the Shadows just rise up even more the idea of found family trope and modernize it. And they just turn it into just a found family of anything, any creature. It's not just vampires. And here's where my mind goes. Because here's the thing. Vampires started as the fear more related with death and the afterlife, and the possibility of maybe falling into a limbo of sorts. But that slowly but surely has turned into a more human fear. And I think, yes, it is connected with this showcase that we're seeing of humanizing vampires. And the fear is that of being alone, which granted, I think is an even more terrifying fear. More terrifying because it's one that every single day you are in many ways confronting, because we are social creatures. So just the idea that you want to say something, that you want to share something and you don't have anyone to do so, that's crushing. And it's not just positive things, it's also negative things. The fact that there's someone that you might say, oh, I have a doubt, oh, I have a fear, and they're like just there and they listen to you and they're like, yes, it's valid what you feel. Oh my gosh, that's such an important feeling for absolutely everyone. Sadly though, we live in a world that is, since we were born, it's telling us that we need to keep on working, to man up, to grind, to keep on fighting, to go, 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 go. And some of us are like, I don't get why, and I don't particularly want to do it. I don't really think I need to do it, but I understand that I have to do it, and straight off the bat, already outcast. And that means you're on your own. You feel there's no one to talk about it. You feel that nobody understands you when you try to speak. And that just furthers the feeling of, oh, I'm going to die alone. I talked a little bit about queerness, but to be fully honest, that for me wasn't really an issue. I just kind of was like, yeah, that sounds good, and we move on. I had other things to deal with. For me, it was actually the way my mind works in a way. That was actually made me feel that feeling of otherness, of like, oh, everybody has the rule book, everybody understands what we're doing. I don't even know what game we're playing. And again, automatically, if you have any doubt, if you have any fear anything that is not the line that they show it, outcast. And here's also when it can get tricky, because I understand that right now there is a lot of talks in regard to kind of embrace mental illness and to kind of talk about it in a way like, yes, this is who I am, this is me. But I don't fully agree, because here's the thing, I understand the point of it, but my special ability, it's a disability. You know, that TikTok, in a crazy turn of events, my disability has disabled me. And funny enough, this is a feeling that a lot of people have for, again, many reasons. It's like, oh, I do not really function here. I am struggling to just do basic things that I see people around me do. And you feel other, even by your own family members sometimes. And in the world we live in, there's also no space to talk about it. There's very little possibility. So I might even try and, again, trying to discuss about my disabilities and all of that. But you lack still the words. There's a lot of stigma still out there, and a lot of the main stories that are pushed out maintain that stigma. So I'm lacking there, I'm lacking here. I have no one to talk to. I sometimes don't even know exactly what's going on in my mind. Of course I go into half-dead mode. And I am one of the lucky ones. As a kid, I wanted to be the protagonist because I just wanted to have the cool powers and want to be liked and have friends and people that care for me and people that I would care for. And I would go through life easy peasy lemon squeezy. But isn't that what we all want? So what really is about vampires? And again, I think we are humanizing vampires, and it's telling us that we are going back to kind of the inside, to very simple terms. And I think that more we talk about it, we can turn, again, the narrative and using the things we're learning and that we're talking about. So, for example, more do I know about my neurodivergence, more do I actually notice that the people around me, especially those that I feel really comfortable with, might have also been neurodivergent or just some share certain characteristics. And already that is like, oh, okay, so it's not just one person, there's so many things. And it also happens that sometimes two people that have their own way of thinking, that might not be the linear one, get together and they tell the stories. And that is the importance also of human stories, is that by sharing them, I might say, oh, hey, that's actually me. That's actually representation. Not just in one thing, but more than one, which makes it even easier for me to say, hey, I cannot explain that. I like the words, I like so many stuff, but take that a little bit, and that way you might understand a little bit more what's going on with me. And already with that, the feeling of, oh, there's other people out there like me. Oh, I'm not alone. Oh, it can happen. People can understand me. I can communicate. It's such a beautiful feeling that I would hope everyone around the world could feel that. Regardless of the type of outcast or whatever creature you choose to represent yourself. I genuinely think that all of the media that I talked about, especially the one when I was young, it wasn't really just the fact that they were vampires. It was more about the fact that I was connecting to them in some way because of things that I wanted to. And that's it. And that's the most human thing. Connecting to things. And that's not just for vampires, that's for any other creature and any other feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm different than everybody else, I am the messed up one. You're not. Because deep down inside, whether you feel like an outcast for whatever reason, we all want a happy ending. We all want to be happy. That's it. We all hope not to live life on serious mode all the time. To have a full range of emotion and have the freedom to express that emotion, as well as hopefully having people that can express them to you. And it is not that I am better or I am worse. It is not that I am free of making mistakes or any type of accountability. We all are, at the end of the day, humans trying our best to just exist. And things happens. Stuff happens of all sorts of ways. And yes, I'm not going to deny the idea that one bite could change it all. It's great. The possibility that just flying away is going to solve all my issues. Yes, of course I will love that. But maybe the solution is in the conversion that we're seeing. solution might be more human than we realize. So it might be less in regards to the quantity of otherness and the quantity of things that the world is asking for us. Perhaps it's just looking for the quality. Maybe after all this time, quality is what counts. Hopefully I explain myself, because again, sometimes my brain really struggles with these things, but I want to try to do it by, again, putting together things that are close to me or have been for different times of my life. Try to explain a little bit, to tell stories. And who knows, maybe it is completely different for you, but that's fine. If anything, I would be really interesting to know what are your opinions in regards to vampires, in regards to the media I talked about, and in general, in regards to the idea of an outcast and the world we're living. Sure, why not? Yeah, have a nice day. Bye-bye.